During a recent rally, Donald Trump asked someone in the crowd to throw him a pen. And as somebody threw him a pen, it landed on the floor. He kind of turned and looked at it, and then he bent over and picked it up. And coming back to the microphone, he said something to the effect of, "Well, old Joe, I'd like to see old Joe do that," as if, you know, he were the more agile of the two. One of the major considerations of this year's election cycle seems to be the cognitive and physical fitness of the two candidates based on their advanced age. At 81, is Joe Biden too old to run again? And is it ageist to even ask that question? Well, let's put aside for a minute the fact that Trump is not that far behind him in age. And I can't help but wonder why this frame has become so important to our national conversation about who our next president should be. Why have the stereotypes about physical fitness for the office affected this campaign? And why in the world is the ability to sprint to the platform or bend over to pick up a pen considered to be important for the US presidency? I have to ask myself those questions. And I have to find my page. Excuse me. Somehow I've gotten them real out of order. In the UUA's Article 2 proposal that will be voted on during this General Assembly in June, pluralism is listed as one of the ways that we can bring love into the world. The proposal states in part, "We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth or meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect." This morning, I ask us to reflect on the diversity of age in our congregations as a way of meeting that proposal, that way of bringing love into our communities and our congregations. How does the fact that we are all of diverse ages affect how we come together in congregational life? There are countless aspects to a self, and age is certainly one of them. Many of us have heard about the gifts and challenges of various generational cohorts, although I hear more about the challenges than the gifts, actually, often. The silent generation, for instance, is known for being especially conformist, but also they have a very strong work ethic. The boomers, my own cohort group, is known as being very materialistic. But also, we were the first generation to protest the Vietnam War and think about environmental degradation. We were also the first generation to use college campuses as a place of protest. Gen X is remembered for being hooked on MTV culture, but also gave us LGBT rights. Millennials are often called self-centered, but also are the most community-oriented, environmentally conscious generation that we have had, and gave us new concepts about work-life balance that we had not considered before. We complain about Gen Zers being addicted to constant online connection, but they are also the more inclusive, accepting of difference, and politically aware than previous generations. And Gen Alpha, which we don't really know that much about yet, because it only started in 2010. We do know, however, that they are the most technologically savvy among us, and will be for quite some time. But think about this. As we think about the differences between the generations, think about this last generation, Generation Alpha. They have never known a time when there was no social media to connect them. Me, on the other hand, I went through college with the slide rule. How do we begin to bridge those differences? No matter what generation you were born into, no matter what year it currently is, older generations of people will always be scratching their heads and thinking, what is it with these kids? And younger folks will likely consider olders out of touch. The speed of technology advances will only exacerbate this fact in years to come. And I think this makes it even more imperative that we try to respect generational diversity and consider the ways in which stereotypes about age, i.e. ageism, affects all of us, not just our elders. Young people, it has been found, that believe ageist stereotypes will tend to have more age-related illnesses than people who don't have stereotypes. I often hear that the complaint that older people use most of our healthcare dollars. Have you heard this? The problems of Medicare, all of that, Social Security. Well, it's true that older people do use most of our healthcare dollars, but that's only because most of our healthcare dollars are spent during our last 6 months of life, regardless of how old we are when those 6 months occur. We are fortunate in this country that most of the time we are at ripe old age when we use those dollars. So there's skewing, but the fact is that it can happen at any age, not just older age. And I also want to say that children and youth often get caught up in this ageist trap as well. Today in this country, we are obsessed, unhealthily obsessed, with the middle working years as a way of determining someone's worth. We value productivity and profit, and so we place very little value on the first quarter of life, forgetting our common responsibility for affordable public education, for taking care of poverty-ridden children. There are certain things like affordable public education that should be available for everybody, at least up until the age of 20. We should care about preparing everyone for their next stage of life. And to not do so, I believe, is an ageist form of thinking. Our focus on production and profit also causes us to neglect basic practices like family leave and vacation time. All of that is because we are trying to deny the basic realities of a normal life cycle. We know that there are times in our lives when it is harder to get through an 8 to 10 hour day, when we have children, after we've just had a baby, if we've had an illness, or simply the wear and tear of living a long life. Do you know that many European countries have gone to 6-hour workdays? 6-hour workdays that coincide with the school day, so that parents can pick their children up from school, prepare a decent dinner that night, and be with them in the evenings. To me, what this means is that they are placing the same value on their children's experience as the work experience of the middle years. So what if we could honor and respect the natural flow of a human lifespan? What if we could change the frame, looking at the aging process through the lens of the various spiritual tasks that our spiritual masters have told us through the ages are necessary to grow into a wise elder? Tasks that transcend the cohort generational groups that we may be part of. Spiritual tasks that reach back through the ages. I wonder if this might be a way of beginning to bridge our differences, to see each of these areas of life with equal value. Carl Jung suggested that we live our lives in 4 major quarters. I think I've talked about this in the past, but I have to say it again. Each of these quarters lasting anywhere between 20 and 23 years. And these quarters often get pushed out of our awareness by cultural stressors. Jung felt that the way we approach each quarter depends on our personality type. Personality types that he talked about were later formalized by others into the Myers-Briggs personality type indicators. His schematics of what those 4 quarters look like based on our types are very complicated, and I'm not going to go into that this morning. But for our purposes this morning, let's think about those 4 quarters as sort of a flow between yin and yang energy. Yin energy being concerned with the experience of being, and yang energy being mostly concerned with doing. Being and doing. Yin, with the importance of creating a personal story. Yang energy being associated with personal, public achievement. Yin energy with relationship, and yang energy with power. Yin with vulnerability, yang with conquest, yin with being at one with life's processes, and yang trying to change it. Now, neither yin nor yang energy is positive or negative. They are both necessary energies for a balanced life. But what's true is that yin energy will be most present in the youngest and oldest among us, and yang energy, the energy of doing, will be more present during our middle years, the second and third quarters of life. But each of these quarters has spiritual work associated with it. So in the first quarter, our work is to take in information to get a sense of who we are in relation to our culture, our generational cohort group, our family, our communities, and our passions. What's our relationship with our passion? We begin to create the ego strength that will serve as our container for our particular personal journey through life, asking questions like, what makes me significant? How can I support myself? And who will I invite to go with me? In the second quarter, which hits us around the age of 20 to 23, we start a career, we find intimate relationships, we decide where we're going to live. We continue to refine and define those first quarter questions. We learn the sacred no that gives us dignity, identity, direction, significance, and boundaries. These are years of a healthy narcissism, a healthy self-centeredness that drives us toward a really busy productivity. And then in the third quarter, we enter midlife, and we begin to hear that still small voice that asks us that Mary Oliver question, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? This is a little bit different than the voice that was calling us in the previous quarter, because now we've built that container and we begin to look at whether we've been filling it with what really serves us. Do we need to do some decluttering? Do we need to take some corrective actions to begin looking at what the rest of our life is going to look like? Ages 40 to 46. Maybe we've confronted a death, a divorce, a layoff, or faced some other losses that make us feel like that container is leaking a little bit. Our ageist culture, what does our ageist culture call this? The midlife crisis, right? It is not a crisis so much as a needed transition, a healthy, necessary transformation of the spirit. But whether it becomes a midlife crisis or a transformational moment often depends on how much we are willing to give up what seemed to be important to us in the last quarter. And then in the final quarter, the fourth and final quarter, which I now find myself in, we take a step back from all that yang energy of public achievement and power dynamics in the workplace. And even if we're still working, we start to see those power dynamics as kind of superfluous to our work. Jungian analyst Connie Zweig calls this shifting from role to soul. And this seems accurate to me. It's a time to disidentify from the roles and values that guided all that midlife productivity, the rushing, the multitasking, the duties and yearnings that seemed so important just a few years ago. I think this shift is one of the things that makes grandparents so special, because they can kind of, relate to the children based on their own intrinsic value instead of needing to feel like they have to shape them in their own image, which parents have to do. It's a time for mentoring new generations of leaders rather than being a leader yourself. It's a time for taking stock of diminished capabilities and appreciating what you find. For instance, I used to be a runner. My knees don't allow me to do that anymore. But I now have the time to take long, hours-long walks through the woods along the river where I live. And that shift for me, that trade-off, quite honestly, has been really beautiful. So what if we were to give all 4 stages equal value? First of all, I think what would change is that we wouldn't be so reluctant to move into the next phase of our lives. Fighting ageism does not mean trying to behave as if age doesn't matter. Think of this, fighting racism doesn't mean saying race doesn't matter. What it requires of us is to have an appreciation for the different phases, for the transitional points that move us to the next place, and for the special gifts that each age offers. In other words, doing what the Article 2 proposal suggests, celebrating all of us as sacred beings, embracing our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Think of the richness that we could bring to our congregational lives if we could see each of these phases as important spiritual practices. And all of this leads me back to consider those 2 major candidates for president. We know that both men are in their final 4th quarter of life, a time when we are invited to decouple from our egos, climb off the ladder of success, lean into our true natures, and embrace that yin energy to just be. It seems to be not what the presidency was made for. Is this really a container that either of these men need to be filling? Well, I'm going to leave that to history to decide. But at the very least, what I would love to see is for us to get past the ageist questions of who flubs their lines the most and who can bend over to get a pen. I want to know who has entered this stage of life most successfully. Who demonstrates a gift of hard-earned wisdom? Who is able to honor his energy and limitations and surround himself with competent people? Who is interested in mentoring the next generation of leaders? Thomas More writes, aging is not just adding years to our total on earth, it is a process of humanization, of becoming more spiritually and culturally complex, a blending of valuable experience with youthful hope and ambition. This is what I hope to see in our next president. May each one of us be true to our soul's age, embracing our chronological age while at the same time choosing to live without age, ageless, with as much joy as we can. May we accept our passage from one age to the next with grace, surrounded with love, being seen for who we are and for who we are becoming. May it be so, and blessed be.